Hello, everybody's getting on. We'll unmute and get started here in just a minute.
Very good.
Hello. So I think we've got pretty much all of our folks here. I know Linda had texted me that she is coming. So this is kind of a combination between Downtown Advisory Board members and community character team members. And the consultants with Bolton and Mink who are doing the comprehensive plan. This meeting's going to be recorded, and so we'll send some information out for the board members who weren't able to make it today.
Lorna, can you hear us? Or Meg or Grant? Yeah.
Yep, we can hear you great. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, we'll turn it over to you guys.
Awesome. Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us bright and early on your Tuesday. My name is Lorna Allen. I am with Bolton and Mink. We are working with the city of Hendersonville to deliver the Gen H comprehensive plan. And part of this comprehensive plan will be a focus on downtown. So we're really excited to share some of our initial ideas with you all today and get some good feedback. So also with me from Bolton and Mink is Grant Miachi. And I have Meg Nealon with Nealon Planning. She's doing the land use piece of the plan. I have Ben Hitchings with Green Heron, who's going to be talking us through some implementation ideas today. And then Jen Gregory with Downtown Strategies, Retail Strategies, who is going to be thinking about the economic and market realities for downtown and the city as a whole. So with that, I'm going to get us started and share my screen Great. So I'm going to give you all a very brief project update today because I know you're here to kind of dig into the downtown component. Also, just give you a quick snippet of what happened at the open house on the 13th. And then we'll get into the components of the downtown master plan that we have started to prepare for. And then 2 of the 5 focus areas that we'll be diving in deeper on. So we'll be focusing on those today with you all. And then we're going to jump into Concept Board, which is a tool that we've been using to get ideas together. So that link should have gone out to you all from Jamie. And then after this meeting today, we'll also share this presentation so you all can have it and reference it. So we are now in March, moving towards putting the draft plan together, and a part of that is the downtown plan. This will be one of our final kind of formal engagement for the comprehensive planning process before we move into the adoption phase, which will include a public hearing and additional engagement. So we are starting to pull together our implementation strategy, those recommendations, starting to put together a future land use map, as well as more targeted strategies and actions for key areas and ideas throughout the city and in more focused areas. So as we're wrapping this phase up and moving towards adoption, as I mentioned, there will be opportunities for additional engagement to provide feedback on the draft plan. So we held our final open house on the 13th. We had a great turnout. I know some of you all were able to join us. We had folks waiting at the door at 4 o'clock to be let in and start to review the draft vision statement, goals and objectives, look at future land use and conservation scenarios. We had 3 to share. And then also in this image, you can see an example of one of the focus areas that was being discussed to provide some very specific feedback to those locations. And then Ben presented some initial recommendations, some big ideas. We did receive some feedback on the vision statement and got some really good content there, as well as the draft goals. And you can see that authentic community character was the one that really rose to the top. And we kind of heard from a lot of folks that they feel that downtown is that kind of embodiment of the character for the community. Also safe streets and trails, so making good connections. And then healthy and accessible natural environment was another one of those goals that rose to the top.
One of the things that we are doing as we solidify the goals and objectives for the plan and the updated vision is then to work to translate that into meaningful and manageable implementation projects that the city can pursue in the years ahead. And the first step in that is to identify some big ideas. So we had 8 big ideas that we shared based on the feedback that we've received to date. And just like with the goals, we invited folks to vote on the different ideas. And you can see the ones that rose to the top, protecting and restoring natural systems, energizing a multi-pronged approach to affordable and accessible housing, and leveraging partnerships to protect Apple Country. Also close behind was transforming gateways and corridors into the city. So that was a helpful first engagement as we move to implementation work.
And so in the scenarios that we presented at the meeting, we're really looking at 2 different directions. You see on the screen 3 options, A1, A2, and B. The first 2 we would call sort of that trend or business as usual approach, just to look and see if we kept doing things the way we've been doing them, what would that do for us? So in short, A1 is playing out a build out scenario if zoning was applied, because individual property owners have those choices to do with their property as zoning would suggest. A2 is the influence of the current plan, the 2009 plan, on the land that is currently vacant and or ripe for redevelopment. So we wanted to put those out in front of folks to talk about that. And this third scenario looks at ways at getting at those goals, especially those that rose to the top. But looking at those goals and seeing how, for a future land use pattern, we might do a better job with the development pattern in the future to achieve what the community expects. In all three instances, we held downtown as a constant, but got some great feedback on that. And what Lorna was saying about people wanting to protect that, see it as really the essence of Hendersonville and what really gives the city a lot of its identity. So a lot of support for scenario B. And then in getting to a preferred scenario, based on some of the conversations we've had in reaction to the materials we brought to the meeting, downtown really is its own unique place. So it has been given its own character area and its own set of attributes that describe it and differentiate it from the other places in the city. And we think that's important to hold that going forward. But in terms of the goals that have been crafted to date, we think it supports primarily the authentic community character and the safe streets and trails. But if you read further into those, you'll see how it achieves a lot. But those are two of those top three Lorna was just sharing with you. We also think that in the big ideas that were presented, this is an opportunity to strengthen placemaking. So that experience of being in downtown just gets enhanced over time. We go to the next slide. Some of the imagery that people responded to and quotes that we received have to do with the charm of downtown, protecting what's special about it, and making sure that the combination of businesses down there still have that local flavor, that it's not overtaken with chains and franchises as we have discussed in the past. That's the imagery people that actually people resonate with the images you see on this, but downtown speaks for itself. So a lot of the characteristics we see today are what we would like to carry over into any changes in downtown going forward. And then finally, the questions we were asking internally and with the committee, with the advisory committee, is when we think about downtown, it is a relatively small percentage of the overall study area, which extends outside of the city's limits in ETJ. So the question is, it already encompasses one of your historic districts and one of two MSDs. Now the 7th Avenue area is your other MSD, and it too has a lot of historic features and is well connected, could be even better connected to the heart of downtown. So that question was, should we actually expand this character area to the east to encompass a greater geography, recognizing some of those characteristics?
And Meg, I think now would be a really good time. If anybody has any questions about what we just shared, feel free to let us know. Okay, hearing none.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so as part of this effort, we are going to be pulling together a downtown master plan. And it will have vision and principles that will tie into the goals and objectives with the comprehensive plan. There will be character districts, because we know that various regions of downtown have a different character, and it's important to identify that and to shape the guidelines around that character. It will have economic development recommendations that are very specific to downtown. And then other recommendations for planning, potentially policy, projects, ordinance related recommendations that will also tie to this geography that you see outlined here. And then what will make this very helpful for y'all moving forward will be a set of design guidelines, which will help inform future development in areas that don't already have the historic guidelines. So as you see here on this map, this is the area that we're targeting for the downtown boundary. Much of this area is non-residential zoned. So we're really kind of targeting everything but the neighborhoods to focus on. And as I mentioned, we will be tying back into the Gen H goals with the downtown plan and really making sure that our recommendations resonate with these goals. So within the downtown boundary that we're studying currently, we have identified kind of 4 character districts. To the north, we have the 7th Avenue district, which encompasses the MSD there and the historic district. And the lavender purple color at the center, we have the Main Street district, which encompasses the historic Main Street district as well. And the more pink color is the downtown district, which is kind of everything outside of the Main Street district. And then we have this kind of emerging district that has a kind of a lot of interesting features going on and interesting features to come, such as the Acoustic Trail, which has been named the Lower Trailhead District. So I think this is a really exciting one as well to start to think about from a character standpoint. So Jen's going to we're going to kind of ping pong back and forth. I'll be talking more planning policy project, and she'll be kind of focused in more on economic development.
Thank you, Lorna. Good morning, everyone. So as we've really listened to the feedback that we received from the opportunity we had to meet with all of you back in November in person, and also the various public engagement opportunities we've had, we've started to develop some potential economic development strategies for the downtown. And we're going to go through a few of these. I'll briefly kind of describe each one, and then perhaps we can get some feedback or thoughts on that in just a bit. So the first being incentives. A lot of discussion was had about the economics of backfilling vacancies. You know, the pro forma may not work if there are improvements made to some of these buildings and you compare that to the lease prices that local mom and pop businesses are able to pay. So how do you make those numbers work? And one way certainly is incentives offered by the city. So we'll be identifying specific ones that North Carolina statute allows, and also that we have seen to work well in other similar communities. Second is policy for vacancies. And I think we talked about this in person as well. And that is really, how do you kind of use that carrot and stick approach to encourage property owners to invest and revitalize their buildings, but also have a backstop for if there are property owners that are absentee or apathetic and just do nothing with their space, don't try to lease it, don't try to fill it. How can we affect that? And there are some policies that can be put in place regarding that, more of a stick as compared to the carrot, if you will, for incentives. Another is activity after hours vitality. A lot of discussion about how do we get businesses to stay open later, you know, without rolling up at 5 o'clock. And so we have some specific kind of campaign, marketing, and promotion strategies in mind that would be incremental, not asking businesses to stay open late every single night. That's just not practical. But in special circumstances, that can really be promoted well. Another, reimagining existing real estate. We had a lot of discussion about this, and this is something that is really important to us, being a downtown planning firm that is really rooted in retail and real estate. And that's understanding that retail is changing. many people are shopping online more than in the brick and mortar, there is still an overwhelming majority of people that prefer to shop in the brick and mortar, but having that bricks and clicks approach is critical. So how can we work with property owners to understand those trends and rethink the square footage of each of the storefronts in their space? So this incorporates potentially utilizing demising walls to create more kind of micro retail spaces in existing real estate, but also thinking about micro retail, which is our last bullet point. How do we create lower barrier opportunities for entrepreneurs that are not quite ready for a brick and mortar space and a long-term commitment, but something somewhere where they can pop up and engage with the community, especially around potentially the trailhead or other locations?
So now we're going to kind of break down each of these districts, kind of the key themes that we feel are emerging, and we would really love this portion of our kind of presentation to be conversational with you all. So if you're seeing something, please react to it and share with us so we can improve our direction here. So first off is the 7th Avenue district. We are seeing a great opportunity with a new streetscape under construction soon, and the additional phases of that as real opportunities for this district. Seeing opportunities for additional placemaking and activation of the public realm, but also of private properties. This could be done through art. This could be done through public spaces. This could be done through programming. So a lot of opportunity in this area. Coming up with new development standards in this area. So Grant's going to get into that a little bit later with the design guidelines and how we're going to start thinking about that. And then also just being sensitive to the surrounding neighborhoods and thinking through how transitions may occur, knowing that we have kind of long-standing neighborhoods to the north and to the south that are also included in this kind of study area district. So those are kind of the themes that we heard starting to emerge, but if you all have other thoughts and ideas, we'd love to hear from you. Okay. So Jen has put some thought into some of the 7th Avenue district strategies as well.
And those, of course, the really exciting part of this master plan is that there are these unique areas with very specific opportunities and also histories and kind of cultural nuances. So with the 7th Avenue district, first, a big priority of ours is to focus on rent stabilization. As new investment comes in to all of these districts, many times the rent prices are driven up, and that's just because new construction means money, new investment, and those developers need to recoup that cost. And so focusing on how can we stabilize the rents while attracting new investment so that some of those, and I'll skip kind of to this bottom one, minority business owners and folks that have really spent their lives and their livelihoods in this district, how can we preserve that, retain that, and support those individuals? So we'll be identifying strategies to focus on that. Also, regional retail locations. We talked a lot as a group with you guys about what is our desire? Do we want local mom and pops, national retailers, somewhere in the middle? And certainly local mom and pop businesses is the priority. But as we did a driving tour of the 7th Avenue district, there are quite a few regional retailers. What this does is it allows a local franchisee to invest in this area but also bringing a brand that is a little bit more familiar and has a bit more sustainability than a brand new concept. And so we will be running some additional data to identify which regional retailers may be best suited, but we think that's a good fit for this district because there's already some of that synergy. Trail-oriented development, really focusing on micro retail and opportunities for entrepreneurs. And then in addition to rent stabilization, minority business incentives. How can we encourage more minorities to, continue to invest in this area to fill, removing barriers essentially for some of those subsects of the entrepreneurial kind of ecosystem.
Does anyone have any feedback for this district?
Don't be shy.
Yeah.
This is our time to hear from you.
For absorbing it.
Yeah.
Has anybody
where-
on seventh? Seriously, has anybody on seventh sat down with this group and had conversations specifically? That's what we're doing here. Well, I mean, prior to this.
And the last time we had our last roundtable.
City Hall, I think, everybody.
And then we had the initial startup, we had the stakeholder group and had the
Council
Caroline's there,
conversation as well.
Brandy Bar.
Oh, yeah, the conversation, the Main Street, down at the main event was focused on downtown. There's been a series of
Wendy?
focuses on that.
High level general conversations.
So what are you getting at, Bill?
Yeah, I'm just trying to give you credit for how far this discussion has gone with seventh. It's a little fuzzy here, just these, bullet points. Rent stabilization. Right now, and I know this is a progressive plan, but right now, this is not an issue, right? Not a primary issue. The character of 7th Avenue is, in my mind, the biggest question going forward, and how that is developed and guided, right? To make sure that it develops into the type of business district that we want 7th Avenue to be. And that's irrespective of Main Street, right? I think a lot of us have our own kind of machinations of what 7th should become, but regional retail locations,
The White Duck Taco and Marco's is what she,
yeah,
Let's see more
exactly.
examples.
And that's,
fine, bad.
I don't know about that, we haven't had this conversation, for me, that's off the table.
You don't want
I
that.
do not.
Okay, you want individually
No,
owned.
I want this to be a unique, intimate area that is developed by using the process of defining business acquisition with the character that is designed and developed for 7th to become. Okay, and that would be, new entrepreneurs like Claywood or ourselves. Matt's been there a long time, but it's the same thing. It's a unique component, right? And it's not t-shirt stores, teddy bear stores, and that is, personally, that's not where I want to see 7th go. Okay, a yogurt, we've got our ice cream shop, we're good, right? Trail development, absolutely. If we get down that far to tie it in, in 15 years or whatever, yeah, that would be a fantastic component to the lower end, but
So let's,
I need to shut up.
well, no, let's go back to the regional retail locations, because she said that they were gonna do some like specific examining of what might fit there. Now, this is even further down Seventh, like, you think White Duck Taco is a benefit to Seventh, or is, now, if we had everything with White Duck Taco type, maybe not, but if it, I think it adds to the mix. And I don't know that, I mean, I think that they would like to figure that out. I mean, there's a lot of places that we don't even think of as regional chains, like Flat Rock Bakery and West First, and they have one in Brevard and they have one in Fletcher. That's all the same, like, ownership management. I actually think they've since split them, but still, it was started in the.
Hindo, isn't Hindo, isn't Greenville?
Hindo has two, maybe a third one, two, I think, and then, like even D9, which that's a whole other thing, but I mean, D9 had multiple locations, but I'm not sure how many people would have known it. So,
Multiple.
like,
locations.
usually when my first reaction too is like, hell no, no change. I don't shop at change. I don't do that. So that's, I mean, I get where you're coming from because I feel the same way. But I think what they're getting at, like, if they find that that is more, that type is more suited, like White Duck, something like that, or what is the Taco Boy? Not that we need another taco, but Taco Boy was in Folly Beach and now they have a location in Asheville. And I think they're opening a third location. So it's only 3. It just can be easier.
It's
Yeah.
more the case of, not a national chain, not
Right.
the big
Right.
guys, but also that White Duck wasn't a chain when they moved in there, right?
They're like third or fourth location.
Yeah,
Not when that store was there, they had what, 3 locations?
but that's what they're talking
Yeah,
about.
I think
That's what we're
that's,
talking about. Yeah.
I understand, but they, now they're going to Chattanooga, I think, so, that's not the point of my concern, because they are themselves well-suited, oriented to the character, the vision that I think we've been talking about, right? They fit into that footprint very, very nicely. Marco's might be a great pizza chain. Yeah, well, but a wood-fired gourmet pizza house
Would have been a nicer.
would have
pizza
been a
place.
better choice, except that they came early, before
Before everything was
yeah,
getting
before
going
the
on it.
momentum got, people talking about where do we go?
So
Yeah.
what we have done before with a variety of things, not necessarily retail yet, but we have, I mean, years ago thought we need a hotel. We ended up with the Mill Apartments, but there was a lot of effort there to assess what we needed and find and then court different developers that could bring us exactly what we needed. Interesting series of events led to having Mill Apartments, which has turned out fine, but I mean, that could have very well gone the other way and we could have gotten a hotel exactly like we had determined that we would need it. It just for a series of.
and then we ultimately had private development of hotels right close to the area, which may or may not have been.
But if we can do the homework beforehand and hand pick what we would like to see, we won't necessarily get it all, but hopefully we could ward off some potential things that we would not prefer because we have put,
Well,
packages forward and gone to ask people what we want this, come do it. Instead of waiting until somebody shows up saying, I want to do this. And then we're like, oh God, we're not prepared, backpedal, which I personally think is what's happened in Asheville a lot. They didn't plan enough and didn't go find what they thought they needed. And then just were reacting when someone showed up and said, I want to do this.
Well, you have a fine balance here because you can't stop a building owner from allowing a chain of something to come into their
Right.
building unless your zoning says, sorry, local only. And is there such a zoning? No, you have to balance. And I personally, as a consumer, am fine with a White Duck Taco just down the street from a beautiful art gallery and a cool bourbon bar, because it gives people a variety of opportunities to spend their money, whether they want to spend a lot or a little. So I think it's difficult to determine entirely that you can't allow certain kinds of businesses if they're national businesses and they have 10,000 locations around the country.
This is getting more on that, like what Caroline's mentioning on what where we want to focus our efforts on targeting, because you're right, we can't prevent what goes into private places except for what is or isn't allowed in zoning.
Right.
But I think what this is,
It's going out.
think more of something like what that specific type of thing you would want to have recruited there. So then it fills those spaces with what we would want to see versus what could just come in at the highest rent if that's something like a White Duck or whatever.
I think
This is really good conversation. I'd like to hear what y'all have to say about the other districts as well, because I think there's going to be some commonalities when we get to the Main Street and the downtown district, and then also the Lower Trailhead district.
So Lorna, this is Matthew with Underground Baking, Independent Roasters. So yeah, we definitely want to progress, but I'd like to put a little bit of input in. I think what we're on the same page about is we've been talking about promoting the district, 7th Avenue district, as having a higher quality experience. So the expectations may not be there, they might be there, but the idea is that what's being offered in the 7th Avenue district is going to exceed expectations. So I think that's what we're talking about. We're talking about regional retail, is that, no offense to Marco's, but it's a franchise pizza place. The expectations is you're gonna get a $9 pizza. So I think that's kind of what we're on the same page. What I hear is that the quality of the experiences that we want to promote in this district, especially, is that it is a mix. There's definitely, that's really, really important to maintain a mix. But really the idea of working with property owners and preserving the historic nature of the buildings, and maybe projects that are building specific, like for example, the Chicken Shack just got sold and it's acquired, and the owner of that property is looking actively for a chicken type of concept to go into that building.
Because of history.
That's historically, that's a good idea.
But what
That's a really good idea.
what we don't want are Gatlinburg type t-shirt shops. And we don't want predatory fake skincare people and things like that. So what we can do to prevent that, and this would be an actionable item in the plan, is to evaluate what we have, what we're missing, like what is it called? Leakages. So it's a inventory basically of what we're not providing with business, and then identify those things and put them in there. Now, it is easier to do that with a small retail chain. Black Bear is now too. He's only got 2 locations, but I would not doubt it that he will do a 3rd in 2 years. So probably not on 7th because he'll go further out. But I mean, if we can identify those types of things, they can take up the space that otherwise would be super vulnerable to things like Optimum or a gross t-shirt shop.
I think they might be ready to
move on.
but I think that this is helpful for it.
I think you're gonna hear this come up more, and Jen is in developing these, looking at these kind of strategic initiatives. So it's good feedback. I think those comments, while focused on 7th, are gonna be true for what we envisioned for all.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think the way that y'all ultimately ended up describing regional retail locations is what they meant.
Local.
It just took a little for y'all to get there maybe, but.
if I can,
Yeah.
one last, because for the next advisory meeting, one of the items on my personal agenda is to bring up the development of a 7th Avenue Business Committee, right? Composed of property owners and business owners to help develop and massage and guide this idea, this very concept, and try to get some structure developed that would help not only us businesses and, seeing through the fog ahead of us, but the property owners, and what we, the tenants, the business owners are looking for and are expecting them to follow through on for this district. It may be that, some property owner can pick up a new building down there and then do whatever they want. But right now, we've got a couple of damn fine property owners that have the goal kind of on the same page and in sync to where we all want to take this. But I'd like to have a group come together just on 7th so we can internalize and talk about these things.
I think economic vitality would be a good place for that.
Yes.
We're a little light
Yeah.
on things, and if we focused on that, which there's a lot of work to be done on something like this particular action item.
Yeah.
That would be a good home. And I think we should not exclude people that aren't on 7, because I mean, I don't have to list my reasons out for that, but that would be a nice home for it.
Actually, if you guys wouldn't mind, I'm gonna add one last comment as a building owner and have 3 tenants in the area. If you don't get the building owners on the same page, we are gonna find whoever we feel will fit within the space that we have available. So if you're not actively engaging the building owners, and oftentimes we know when something's coming available months in advance, maybe a year in advance. So if they are not engaged individually or as a group, then you can have all the development strategies you want. They're going to go for the tenant that will fit the needs of their particular space and their desire for rent. So I've been somewhat picky along the way, but some other landlords and building owners have not. So you've got to get that group together.
All right.
Thank you.
Good.
Okay.
Next.
So the next area that we're going to focus on is the pink area, kind of outside of what we see as the Main Street area. And some of the things that we're starting to think about in this area are more connectivity related, thinking through how additional beautiful streetscapes can occur beyond Main Street, so that, these ties in very nicely to kind of that economic development piece, creating that desirability for businesses to locate and other locations throughout downtown. Another thing that we're going to be thinking about too in this area is thinking about transitions. So thinking building height, but also building form, so that we're being conscientious of the neighborhoods to the east and north of this district, and also to the west, but also the Main Street district itself. So where can we promote more height or more density, and where are locations that we should not do that? So thinking through that very strategically. And as we kind of get into the design guidelines, we can talk a little bit more about that.
So I think I'll breeze through these because I know I've taken a lot of time already, but I think we are really thinking about how in this area we can increase density in key locations, like Lorna mentioned, with more residential within walking distance to Main Street, really just enhance the vitality of this whole corridor beyond drive your car, park, and shop or eat. So a big part of this and identifying these core kind of key locations for increasing the density. We also want to think about uses that complement residential that are not just straight commercial, because we do know that for businesses, many times they are looking for visibility for a lot of, pedestrian traffic, cars, and sometimes in more of the side streets and kind of areas that are not the core main, it's a little bit harder for commercial to survive in those locations. So coordinating uses like office, co-working, and to keep in mind too, I didn't want to interrupt the good conversation in the previous section, but we are thinking, decades in advance or in the future. So we're not just thinking about what the need is today, but in literally decades. And so as we know, office and work habits have changed a lot just in the last 4 years. We have some economic forecasts that show that that's going to be even more so. And that, for the vitality of new buildings, mix of uses, the space must be flexible in addition to the residential space. So maybe next year it's a yoga studio. In 10 years, maybe that's a dental office. Maybe it's a co-working space. So really keeping that in mind as we envision some of these future developments.
Any thoughts or feedback before we move on to the Main Street area? So this is generally for the kind of pink area around the Main Street area. Okay. All right, as we start to focus in on Main Street, some of the key things that we've heard and have been thinking about are really around that character of Main Street, from the physical, also thinking through how the streetscape, the Main Street streetscape really provides a lot of character to Hendersonville and to the downtown itself. So thinking about opportunities for extensions of that streetscape, thinking about creating more people places. I think that's what's really successful about that streetscape design, is that you have locations for people to kind of stick and enjoy being outdoors. And then also really being tied in and coordinated with the park master planning recommendations as they're looking at the potential for a festival street, which would mean that it would be a flexible street that could be closed for events and activities. So we're going to be considering those as we think through Main Street.
So some of the economic development strategies here are thinking about the upper floor. So second floors, immediate side streets off of Main Street. How can we really activate those more? A lot of that does come down to incentives and working directly with property owners to understand the gap. Obviously, there's a lot of policy initiatives that make or codes that make activating those upper floors difficult, like adding sprinklers and specific ingress and egress. And so really unpacking that and identifying some strategies that can hopefully assist property owners kind of meet them where they are to encourage this. And then thinking about other uses, and ideally you guys do have a lot of on Main Street sales tax generating uses, but that should remain the priority, where service industry uses, co-working, residential office goes up or sort of on the side, and just prioritizes that Main Street frontage for uses that will activate the consumer, or that will be activated for the consumer, like restaurant and retail.
And we threw in this just example of Mac Tabby in Charlotte's Noda neighborhood as an example of a little bit more unconventional second floor use. This is essentially a adoption based organization, and with the premise of coffee. So they exist to rehome cats, and they work with the area humane society to do so. But it's kind of a little bit more of a unique use for a second floor, but they may not have been able to afford a ground floor lease. But they're still getting kind of that prime frontage on a Main Street. So just kind of a outside the box example of activating a second floor.
So could part of this action plan include, I mean, I know we know our square footage and we know second, 20 stories inside and everything, but I don't think we have sorted it out into ready to move in, second floor, appropriate for like office type only. ready to move in, second floor, appropriate for retail or designer type service, but they would.
Are you talking about like an inventory?
Inventory, but like really get into the nitty gritty of it. Because we have a ton of square footage in the district that is just empty for whatever, and they're not even trying to rent it. That would be interesting to know why they're not trying to rent it. I mean, these buildings right here on this little section. So then like side street stuff that's ground level versus side street entrance that's second level. And really try to think of what it would be the most useful for, how to make it tax generating. And then how to engage those property owners to achieve that. Because if we just used what we have already, my God, the things that we could have down here.
Chris, why aren't they renting it?
Well, I will say, this is further outside the box than I ever thought about having a cat cafe. But the other thing that you gotta think about, all these vacant spaces, when you start doing work to them and you start having to bring them up to today's code or things like that, that just makes it impossible for anybody that's gonna open up a cat cafe to be able to meet the code to upfit a space. Even if the landlord was to upfit it, he could not get his money back in 10 years or more. And those are the things that when you work in historic districts has to be a little bit of a give and take. And we already went down that road with the 7th Avenue deal at one time in relaxing some of those restrictions and things like that. But at that time, there was not a lot of interest and a lot of people doing those things, but there were requirements that the city was willing to waive, but not a lot of people took advantage of that because there really wasn't traffic happening and things like that. But moving forward, everybody's got a head of steam right now. And if somebody could advertise their building and show it and say, yeah, you can move in next week, clean it up, and you don't have a handicap bathroom, you don't have parking, your doors are 2 inches too narrow and things like that. You got a set of steps that, you know, got higher rises than what they allow today, and things like of those nature could make it easier to start getting people in and things happening. But right now it's very difficult everywhere I know we go that have them bring it up, and they have different levels of, you know, what you have to bring up to code, you know, and that, you know, most of the time, if you do any renovation these day and time, it costs a lot of money. There is that 50% rule that once you get to 50% of the value, that's tax value, then you gotta bring the whole thing up. And that's kind of a.
Curious, Lorna, do y'all have any thoughts on what Chris is bringing up?
That's really where those incentives come into play. You know, you mentioned about improving the value beyond a certain percent, and that there's a gap. And that's really where we feel like appropriate incentives that would, in focused scenarios, would help fill that gap. And those incentives can come from a lot of, you know, different sources and look very different. Also, though, coupled with policies that push property owners that are apathetic, not you guys, but those that own a building that is deteriorating and they're doing nothing about it, and they're not trying to clean it up or fill it. We're not talking about second floor use in this scenario. We're talking about just get a tenant in the ground floor. There would be policies that would penalize potentially that property owner that is completely apathetic and not doing anything to help. And so the combination of all of these different things, oftentimes that property that I mentioned with an apathetic owner, we would like for that property to be put on the market, for that to be a new investment opportunity. A lot of times when you go through the downtown, you're not aware of any properties that are for sale, but there's probably at least 25% of property owners that are willing to sell if they find the right buyer. And so all of these dynamics kind of work together to try to root out the property owners that have no interest in the future of Hendersonville, and then really support the property owners that do want to come to the table and want to help, but are lacking kind of that gap financing.
But so yes to all of these things, but there are also, for example, first floor on 4th and 5th Avenues inside the MSD, probably move-in ready places that have been, they're not in historic buildings, they're not debilitated. We do have properties that are like completely debilitated, especially on the 2nd floor, but they are either underutilized or completely not utilized, that could be utilized for offices, small service things, a massage studio, even a small yoga studio. I mean, so many things, but they're just empty. And I would like to know why. And those are not the ones that we've been talking about that are like outwardly problematic.
Is there a possibility that people that even own these places realize that they could rent a very, very small place, or they're thinking, okay, I've got a tenant in most of the building and I don't realize that I have a space that I could carve out and there's a door and a room and a bathroom accessible somewhere in the building that I could rent that out, that would be allowed for me to do that? Do they even know that?
I don't know. That's a good question. I mean, like right here along 5th or the other side on 4th, a line of micro retail, you know, if you had 4 or 5 micro retails in a row, then that would be.
Those are good conversations.
Yeah.
I think,
and that's what it goes back to, that reimagining existing retail. That was kind of in a 4 or 5 slides back. You are exactly right. Most of those property owners probably have never thought about that. So that is going to be, I'm glad to know that you guys kind of feel that that's a viable opportunity, because you're right. Can a large space, when you're looking for a 3,000 square foot tenant, that's hard to find. That's expensive. That's when you start to get those regional retailers, because a lot of mom and pop folks don't have the money to invest in a space that large, especially if it's not in super desirable condition. But if that can be broken up into 2 1,500 square foot spaces or 3 1,000 square foot spaces, and then if the city can work with them on a shared bathroom lobby in the back so that they don't have to add 2 more bathrooms, that's really when you start to see new cool uses come in, because that barrier's been brought down. The property owner gets more money, and maybe there's an incentive that can help that property owner to divide up that space in a strategic way. So that's kind of what we're talking about, and I'm glad to hear that you guys think that's a kind of a viable option.
One topic I'm not seeing on there that I think this group has talked about before is the first floor residential.
We did talk about that, yeah, and not want it.
Right. So you've got activate 2nd floors, but just curious your thoughts on the ground floor.
Ground floor for residential?
Or preventing that, or it not being an appropriate use in this district.
Yeah, great.
Right now, our zoning code does not prohibit first floor residential.
Is there any downtown that's first floor?
In the
Couple.
No, not first floor on Main.
Not on Main Street.
Oh, they're all, oh, yeah.
But they're on the avenues but we don't disallow it, so it could occur.
Yeah. To me, I think when we start to create a hierarchy of streets, important streets in terms of kind of ground floor activation, that could very much come into play, and should come into play. I think to say wholesale across downtown that you wouldn't have ground floor residential is probably too far, but I think you can be selective on where you allow that to happen. I would say on some of the B and C streets.
But that's part of this too. I don't know that they mentioned that, but for the streets within this area, they're going to tier the different streets so that you would pair the character with the different types of street tiers.
Yeah.
That's an example of that.
Yeah, we can jump into that in I think maybe like 3 slides.
Okay.
Okay. All right. All right, this is our last character district. This has been termed the Lower Trailhead. So some of the things in this area that we're thinking about are kind of around the way it has historically been developed and thinking about the natural systems that occur here, floodplain, streams. So thinking about some of the environmental remediation that could occur, restoration of the wetlands and floodplain, and thinking about open space and recreation creation through conservation would be very key in this kind of area. We have the future Acoustic Trail coming through. It's a really great opportunity to think about how we can activate that trail through trail-oriented development, meaning development that would front along the trail and have appropriate uses that would open onto the trail. Thinking about the potential for a large park. So this would be in coordination with the Parks and Rec open space master plan. Thinking about beautification and connectivity and accessibility and safety on some of our main streets, such as Spartanburg, Greenville, Cayuga, with reimagining the streetscapes. And then we have a lot of suburban shopping centers kind of occurring in this district. So Jen mentioned this before, and I'll mention it again. This is a multi-decade plan. So thinking through as these shopping centers go through their lifespan, what does the future look like for these properties? Are there ways to invest in them to, give them a glow up, or do we need to think about an overhaul and introduce other uses that they may not have today? Could be residential, could be open space, could be other things. So these are all things that we're thinking about in these areas. And what's not listed here too that I think I will add is also transitions, specifically where we're transitioning to purely residential areas, thinking about how that will show up in kind of the design guidelines conversation.
And just briefly, some of the economic development strategies, thinking about green space as the new anchor. We talked about this when we were together with you guys in November, and especially as we transition to more of those kind of suburban areas. It used to be that department stores, whether on a commercial corridor or in a downtown, were your anchor. That's changing. And especially as we look to the future, there's such a desire for people to gather together. And so thinking about how this trailhead can serve as that outdoor gathering space as your true anchor, which will inevitably attract other commercial uses. Planning for pop-up retailers along the trail. These are some great images that show exactly what we're talking about. Very small containers for smoothies, bike repair, coffee, fun things that may only be open on the weekends or 2 days a week, letting entrepreneurs test out a concept and really activating that trail with fun commercial uses. And then really identifying ways that those startup businesses can incubate in an area like this rather than going straight into a brick and mortar. And then finally, focusing on that really needed missing middle housing.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, any kind of reactions to this? And the example that we're showing here, we're not saying that this is exactly what you need, but we did find this example kind of interesting just because it's mobile and it's a bike repair, bike sales company that can move around as needed. So thinking about how we can focus businesses that would pair really nicely with the Acoustic Trail.
Good.
Okay. All right.
We want pop up other places, pop up in
Yeah.
micro.
Yeah. Right.
So one thing that we're starting to kind of put some thought into is how the form and the design elements of all the infill that we're talking about, both kind of existing and new, would start to kind of harmoniously interact together. So in because uh, your current zoning standards don't necessarily yield the form that you want or the design standards that you want. The design guidelines are a good bridge between that. So think of them as kind of a step towards modernizing some of your zoning standards. So the expectation of what goes next to you, if you're a building owner or even a resident, is much more predictable and furthers the kind of character that that you want to achieve in all these different districts. And we do that really with three different things: the public realm, so everything between the buildings, primarily streets and streetscapes; site design, so how buildings are oriented; and then building design, in terms of what are the qualities of the space, particularly when we start to think about the qualities of what commercial space may look like, or in the rare instance that you have ground floor residential, how does that interact with the public realm? So one of the things that we first take a look at is just think about this as kind of defining the box, all the different boxes that we're going to allow to be infilled in downtown. And we're thinking about it in terms of particularly height in general. So think about height and transitions. So if we have two different districts, that kind of pink and the purple area, as ways to regulate both height, but also the form and transitions between different uses. So we're kind of thinking through those types of elements right now. We'll focus a lot. Oh, sorry, next slide. I was flipping through my own thing on the screen too. So we put a lot of effort into what we call the public realm. So what are the elements of streetscapes? What types of public realm improvements might a new developer be required to instigate? Some of them may be publicly funded, some of them might be private funded. How is parking handled in terms of on-street? What are blocks? You have a great kind of block network and street network in downtown, but there could be new streets or improvements to alleys that would actually increase the connectivity and mobility options downtown as well. So getting into those details, particularly, you all have set the standard for streetscapes in North Carolina with your Main Street, and you have for decades now, but that doesn't necessarily extend much further out than the block that you have. You'll soon have the 7th Street streetscape as well, but a concise set of design guidelines that will help guide the extension of great public realm throughout all the streets in downtown is really important too. Next slide. And then as we get into site design, we'll talk about frontages. So how much of a particular lot should a building take up, right? That percentage there. So where should buildings and how far should buildings be placed from, let's just say, the back of a curb on an existing lot or street? How could open space and urban open space be integrated into lots that have that kind of space? Some of them may be too small to do that, and some of them may be perfectly fine to integrate new great kind of placemaking opportunities. How do we start to, along the lines of reducing barriers, how might stormwater management be handled in a way that doesn't burden property owners to have to treat everything on site? Parking, another big, you all have been in the middle of kind of the parking discussion, but parking from a form standpoint and where it should go when it exists on site, and also the number of spaces that are required. And then how do you deal with kind of auto-oriented uses, like drive-throughs, which can be completely prohibited in places like this, and many downtowns do, and Main Street areas do, or they can have a set of stringent design guidelines to them where they can still operate and kind of internal to the site as well. So a lot of different options for us to consider on that. Next slide. And then we'll get into building design. So, how is the height and building mass kind of fit into the character? What's the architectural character without getting into the architectural style, whether there's hipped roofs or flat roofs, facade articulation, different building elements in terms of entryways and awnings and windows and transparency. How we handle franchise architecture when it does occur, or if it does occur, to make sure that that it's unique to Hendersonville and not something that gets one of their standards that just kind of plug around the nation. We'll do this really by looking at different building typologies, whether it's mixed use building or a primarily commercial building or a primarily residential building, and then we'll dig kind of lightly into signage and how that can add to the vitality of the district as well. Next slide. So one of the ways that we'll do this is, if you can remember back to our first meeting, we started to pull out the maps. One of the way we'll do this is really taking focus areas in the downtown and really starting to illustrate in plan view and through kind of different high level illustrations and renderings. What does it look like? So what do these design guidelines look like whenever they hit the ground with infill? And then, what might the streetscape look like? Where might open space be associated? So I think we've started to gather some feedback on this. Focus area 1 is really the 7th Avenue to the trailhead, and we've got a lot of great input so far. Some of them easier to deal with than not. So big policy decisions on social safety nets and how you plan for homelessness, and as you continue to develop along the trail is really important. How do you reduce speeds? Whether there's crime in existing parks and stuff. Those are things that we can tangentially start to address, but not solve in a plan like this. And then next slide. And then the downtown focus area is really looking at, as an example of the kind of greater downtown geography, how might infill and transitions start to work from Main Street, which is on your left, down to the railroad and beyond, and how, whether that's the introduction of new mixed use buildings, missing middle housing as we start to get towards the neighborhoods, what those streetscapes might look like as well. So, and new streets. So in general, that's how we'll start to illustrate some of the policy and design standards that we'll suggest in the design guidelines, but we'll kind of illustrate that in a way that'll show people how, at least one option of how things might change in the future. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Lorna.
Thanks, Grant. So we have shared a link with you all to the concept board, and I'm going to actually dive right into it now, and just kind of walk you through how we have it set up. On the left-hand side are all of the boards that we shared at the open house. That way you can have some context to kind of like high-level goals and vision statement down to character areas and their descriptions, and then to the kind of background information to how we started to develop the scenarios. So we have 1, 2, and 3, and then how we're going to advance scenario B as the preferred alternative over the coming weeks. Well, what I wanted to focus your attention on is this center space here. We have some fresh, clean maps of the focus areas. Here, we also have the information that was gathered at the open house here as well. So what we're looking for from you all is some additional information as we start to think about these focus areas in more detail, to understand where the opportunity lies and where we need to be thinking about places for conservation, but also places to kind of reimagine. We've provided some imagery here. So if there are any that really stand out to you as being kind of appropriate or something that you would like to see in either of these focus areas, you can use the sticky notes to place comments on those, or you can even select one and drag it over should you like, or copy it and paste it. So I think we have about 15 minutes left with you all. So it'd be great if we can maybe dive into maybe 7th Avenue. I think there was a lot of discussion there. I think we can use that one as a starting point to kind of hear from you all, and I'm happy to kind of scribble and take notes as we go. But just to help orient you all, here's the Oklawaha Trailhead here, and then we have 7th Avenue as it feeds into Main Street downtown.
Jamie has this link to this concept board. I don't know if you've all used this before, but she'll be able to share it afterwards. You just log in as a guest and you can get in here and add comments, and if there can be multiple people in there at the same time. You'll see multiple cursors kind of floating around. And Lorna, if you want to just show folks how you add notes,
sure,
and that type of thing, but we can actively provide ideas with the time we have left right now, but then you'll have time on your own time to be able to go in here and add additional thoughts.
Unless Lou kills the internet.
Are you still there, Lorna?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yeah. So the hand will move you around, and you can zoom in and out with your cursor wheel on your mouse, and it's fairly straightforward once you kind of jump in, and you can't hurt anything. I've got everything pinned down, so you won't accidentally delete anything, so don't worry about that.
And the parcels that are in pink, Lorna, can you go over that real quick?
Yeah, so these are underutilized parcels. We did a study. Sorry, I don't want to make you guys too. We did a study of vacant land and underutilized properties throughout the city, and developed a land supply map. So from there, we kind of understand which parcels are underutilized. So those are going to be the ones kind of in the pink. So a lot of them are vacant properties. Some do have structures on them, but we're starting to think about more particularly in this area where it is predominantly residential use. There's a lot of parcels that don't have structures on them, starting to think about how we might come up with strategies for providing more housing, additional housing, missing middle housing in areas that it kind of already lends itself. And then along 7th Avenue, there's opportunity too for thinking about infill development, whether parcels could combine and do development. So that's kind of just a test that we did to kind of understand what may turn over in the future as far as development goes.
It's really hard to do virtually.
Especially with all the wiggling.
I mean, I might be able to sit in front of my own computer and play with it and do it, but like trying to like direct it being done here is difficult.
Yeah, and we intended this stage really to be more conversational for the time we had left in the meeting, but we're going to share the presentation with you all, which does have the link in the last slide, so that's available for you all as well.
One thing I'd like to say when he was talking about building height, I know everybody's kind of hung up on nothing too high, but I think you should not limit somebody in the height of the building if they're going to be building something on one of these pieces of property. Because I have seen in other places where now they want you to build higher or make it adaptable because there is no more land to build things on. So if somebody wants to put a building on a piece of property and they just want it tall that they can build into later, I think that should be allowed and not discouraged.
You know, that's, I think, the first time we've heard the unlimited height comment so far.
I think it's an interesting point, you know,
Yeah.
to what you were saying. I lived in Charlotte in the early 2000s and they put a very tall building right outside of downtown Charlotte. And it was the only thing around that was of a 12, 15-story height. And nowadays it's lost in the shuffle. I mean, it didn't take very long. There's a lot more people in Charlotte. However, who knows what's going to be here in 20 years? That's a good point.
Yep. There is one, in terms of building height, one thing to consider too, right? And we'll start to focus in on the actual, what's the right number. In some cases and in some communities, you may artificially set the height lower, but then provide a bonus structure for going higher if there's some additional goals that you want to reach. In a lot of communities, that's how they incentivize affordable housing, right? So you set it a couple stories lower than what you think the market is going to, and then you allow an incentive to, if someone wants to go higher than that, to leverage, paying into an affordable housing fund or to putting a percentage of housing if it's a residential development too. So there's a lot of different options that we could take a look at there as well. It is hard to, if you go with an unlimited height, it's hard to walk it back. We actually tried that in Charlotte recently. It didn't go so well.
Maybe not unlimited, but don't limit it to it's gonna be one story. If you're 60 feet or whatever the courthouse is, there it is. Imagine if you put 3 or 4 story homes on that pink land that you're talking about in the 7th Avenue district that's underutilized as vacant lots. How many more people you could get there with the same motions, with the same footprint, with the same zoning crap you gotta put up with, everything that costs so much, and you get a couple extra floors out of the deal.
Yeah, with walking access to what that would hopefully bring in breakfast places, smoothie shops, things like that people can come in from outside of the district to utilize, as well as the people that live there.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, other towns real close to here are encouraging people to build up now instead of build out, because they've realized they built out as far as they could, so now they gotta go up, and they're encouraging to use the existing parking lots and things like that for it.
Especially if one of the main things that came out of this was protecting apple country and the open spaces that we do have outside of the city, but infill will help that.
Another advantage of building up is you have the next parcel over, which could be left as green space. And I know the preservation of green space is really important too.
Mini parks. Yeah, pocket parks.
I don't know how many here have been to Chattanooga, but I just spent a few days there. And found it very interesting in the way that they have developed their housing fill-in, not just in blocks and areas, but I mean, it permeates the entire city, including downtown. And a lot of their structure, if it's not a condo or apartment building that is maybe 5, 6 stories for multi-family use, but then they also have large, numerous small developments of townhomes and such that are 2 or 3 stories as single unit buildings. And I mean, for me to say I was impressed with the way the residential problem for Chattanooga has been addressed, because this is not old construction. This is very new, you know, in the last 10 years. And so they have done a remarkable job. That was my sense. I haven't been there enough, but they've done a remarkable job of infilling and, you know, getting that housing problem addressed so that it's easy to have access to downtown and or the surrounding areas. So that's, you know, whether it's 7th or, you know, outlying areas. I found that to be a great way to address that.
So this definitely ties in with building height and mass, but one of the things that's been definitely a priority of the community character team and working with historic preservation is design guidelines, design guidance. What does new construction especially look like in the 7th Avenue district? This is something that we've worked really hard on, and we need to continue with that, because that's one of my biggest concerns is that with new construction, that will happen when you look at all the parcels that are available, and perhaps certain properties that are going to be demolished. Unfortunately, we're not talking about a whole lot, but there are a couple. Is that what does new construction look like on 7th Avenue without having the designation of a local historic district, which has not been accomplished on 7th Avenue. So we've been working with historic preservation to establish some type of guidelines, and we're kind of I think we walked our way through that door with the facade, the improving the facade grant program, and working with property owners and establishing some type of design guidelines, especially for facade improvements, but also with considering new construction, and without having the designation of a local historic district where this is what they can do and cannot do with new construction. That's something that we definitely need to continue to address on the 7th Avenue plan.
But then you also look at all that pink space right there, and you know who owns those properties. In reality, in the next 10, 15 years,
Ain't gonna happen.
is it gonna be available? Is it gonna be sold? Will they even sell it? Are they gonna develop it, you know?
Well, you know, and that was my mentality too. I'm hopeful because two very key properties that were perhaps considered to be unsellable or unattainable have been attained. So, you know, I'm encouraged by that.
Can we look over on the right-hand side, like the design, what did they call it? Not the maps, the other stuff.
The pictures. Yeah.
Can we see those for a minute while we're still together in a group? Not to cut the other off, but just want to look at it a little. What are you looking for from us here?
So essentially, if there's any aesthetic that you all feel fits with either of the districts, being the Main Street focus area, or sorry, the downtown focus area or the 7th Street focus area, we'd love for you all to call them out. You can use this post-it sticky note option, select one, and then just draw it. And then you can go in and say, I like this.
So again, to go, one of the earlier slides talks about how the concept, or part of the concept with the downtown master plan component of this, there's the local district design guidelines that's at the center, but then the idea is that there would be new construction design guidelines, not just for 7th, kind of tied to an ABC corridor assessment, but for all of those 4 districts, downtown district areas, that you know, new development that might happen on Washington Street or on Grove or over on Ash or whatever it might be would be subject to some kind of design standards. And as you're thinking about, well, which one of these do I want to see? there may be more than one. You can talk about that as this looks great for 7th, this looks great for, you know, Grove Street or whatever it might be. But that is the idea, is that we would try to have that kind of vision, because I think those are the kinds of standards or guidelines that are, you know, and I know it's hard because we're all in it, we're in the weeds, but don't think about what some property owner is going to do. Think about what would optimally occur. A great scenario.
Yeah.
So like
And it-
apartments on the east side of, East Avenues on the east side of Main Street,
Right.
which I know that it sounds crazy considering what's there right now, but
Why not?
why not? And I mean, it's a taller, a 3-story, you know, apartment building.
Yeah. Good point. I wanted to point out real
Underutilized.
the use, the height, the scale, the architectural style, all those things would be in, like, you're drawing attention to that particular one. And just to piggyback on what Lou was saying, you'd be looking at all those and being like, yes, this is the appropriate scale or use or height.
It looks like Stillwell High School is what it looks like, which is cool though, if we could do an apartment.
Keep in mind
Stillwell.
that cool and pretty costs money, so to have this happen in the next however many years.
Stuff we're thinking
Not,
here, Chris.
We can think big and we can think hopefully.
Okay, we think on East Avenues then.
Well, no, I'm with you. I like the idea, but in reality, if we put too much on somebody, if somebody says, okay, I'm gonna buy this property and I'm gonna do this, and then they find out they gotta make it look like this, look like this, look like this, and they're another million too, it's all of a sudden not such a great idea.
There's communities like that all over the country, like.
There are.
In Texas, there's towns where you can only, for the most part, do limestone or, you know, in Florida, so it's not unreasonable to say.
Not unreasonable, but right now we already don't have developers or landowners that are willing to do anything. So if we're trying to get somebody to do something, when we make it too nice, too pretty, it limits the bucket of people that are willing to do it.
Not doing anything, like Lou said, let's think, you know, what we would hopefully like to see happen and start from there.
Can we go back to 7th?
I think that one of the key elements there too is just you can be very prescriptive about materials and percentage of materials. And if we provide some options for materiality and but still get to the character aspect, that gives a little bit of relief from a cost standpoint too. So for instance, there are places just to say, just like you mentioned in Texas, it's got to be limestone, it's got to be all brick, it's got to be whatever. You might be able to actually kind of calibrate those to where you know, the character of an area. Just use brick as an example, just saying, okay, on a frontage or on a front primary frontage and the secondary frontage, you have to use 30% of X number of materials, and it gives people some flexibility with that without going kind of over the top in terms of cost as well. So we do have some options that way that we can suggest.
There's design guidelines everywhere. There's design guidelines in the city right now.
Concrete block, it should all look like prisons.
Well, you can't actually have all concrete block in certain places. It does have.
Because of
like
design restrictions.
Right, but what I'm saying, you can get there many different ways. It just, we just, if we're gonna say, here's the rule, there should be enough leeway to where the intent is to make it look good.
Yeah.
So how you make it look good, you can get there a lot of different ways.
Yep.
Who gets to decide that?
Can you go back to the 7th slide for a moment?
He decides.
Which slide?
I'll make my little.
But when we were attempting to put post-it notes on it, I just want to bring something up that.
Sure.
You know, we all have ideas about what the business mix and the environment, the intimacy, et cetera, but I would think.
Lorna, you're not sharing screen. Okay, just making sure you did that. Go ahead.
I would think that given this slide right here, you're looking at unutilized properties. It's a good chance for the city as step one. We have on 7th the same problem that Main Street had for years and years and years. No parking. And if our parking problem doesn't get addressed as part of the first steps for this revitalization and development, then property owners come in and make their advancements, their development concepts, put them in place. They may or may not have overflow parking access. They might meet their needs for a building, but 7th as a whole, as a business district, needs to know what the plan is going to be for facilitating parking for shoppers and visitors and so forth that aren't, going to, the 10 parking spaces beside a mat. So, I mean, there's gotta be a plan, there's gotta be something in here that the city has thought about that, okay, we can do this at this point in time, or we should acquire this property and put in, city parking, whatever it is. I haven't seen or heard, any discussion to address that problem. And, now's the time to get a jump on that, because that will help the property owners then utilize their property, or, renovate it, get new tenants in there. Right now we've got space across the street. It's 9,000 feet. So, a big restaurant or whatever is not coming in there right now because there's no parking. They need a minimum of 60 to 80 parking spaces to justify their investment in the restaurant. So
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think as we drill into this area as well, and Jen and I have worked on this in other communities, looking strategically at parking and parking needs per square footages and types of uses and what those needs would be. But as we drill into this area a little bit more, thinking about the opportunities for parking and where shared parking strategies might be appropriate, I'm thinking more specifically in a very urbanizing part of Charlotte, there are some shared parking strategies that work well for new businesses and existing businesses that don't have the capacity to kind of really fully serve their clients and customers. So I think that's really great points, and we'll continue to kind of think through some strategies and locations for how parking could be addressed in this.
We're also looking at improved bicycle connectivity to this district as well. I mean, I know that I've lived here for 3 years, and more often than not, I travel to the district with my family on bicycle from the Greenway to visit the shops and market and whatnot. So improving connectivity, there's currently a feasibility study looking at connecting where the Custa is coming into Main Street, how that's going to connect to the Oklawaha and how it may connect to 7th Avenue. And so we're exploring those alignment options. So that would lessen the pressure on people, and if it's hard to find parking and people want to go there, they will rather bike, or walk if they're in proximity. So
there is that valet parking thing that could be.
Knew that would come back.
So this, I mean, obviously this ties in greatly with streetscape and how 7th Avenue looks and feels a little bit, at least for that block after this is all said and done. But this is something that you've raised a lot over the years, is continuing, further down 7th Avenue. And when you look at this map, you kind of see that. You see this, the upper block there is relatively full. There's not much available there. It is a business district. There is no residential in the upper block. But as we go down the block, you start to see that the properties start to open up, and there's going to be opportunities there for new construction.
And the zoning does not allow multifamily residential currently.
Currently, and that was addressed not too long ago with one property owner looking to.
Yeah, but that was far up on 7th, further up.
That was down, that was further down.
Both.
But it wasn't,
Between the railroad tracks and generally between the railroad tracks and the greenway is C2 zoning. That's right?
Yeah.
And that does not allow multifamily. And so I've heard some conversation about new construction, and you brought up Chattanooga examples and those kind of things. A lot of that pointed towards multifamily residential, which, just making sure everybody knows, that zoning did not get approved, and so it's not permitted.
Not on the street, but there's a lot of pink space that's actually not fronting or on the street right there.
That's right. I mean, on 7th. On 7th.
there were a lot of things about that particular one that were the pieces of that one didn't start well, and it didn't end in favor of that because it felt underhanded. There were things there.
Well, it was
Revisit it.
Well, it was
thing like that for the whole thing, and
Right.
it wasn't gonna be good for everybody.
Right.
that was also taking an existing building that's in not that great a shape, and as far as I was told, not doing that much to it and putting in, X amount of units. So, obviously, right now, the focus is on residential for a lot of developers. That's where the money is. That's where the financing comes in for. But, I think having a residential component to 7th Avenue in the future, I think that would be a good thing. Absolutely. Not necessarily luxury apartments, but again, if you want something nice and pretty, like you said, it's gonna be expensive. So. But yeah, there's quite a bit. You can see on this map. This map is great, but you can see quite a bit that is not being utilized currently.
Can you add that, Lorna, just as a note about adding a residential component to the district?
Like, so what if, like, further down 7th, like,
Well, I think the residential component is fine for 7th. Keeping in mind that the commercial has to be on 7th and on the lower floors, which is what we talked about, because the whole purpose of building that is, people and sales tax and income type stuff going on. People can live in the back and upstairs. I don't think anybody's against that, but you just can't have that become a neighborhood residential street, because it takes away then from the business aspect of, sales tax and making money, which is what really this is all about.
Man, I'm all about mixed use, and I think that especially going forward with developers now looking at 7th Avenue harder than they have before, there's probably gonna be some interest in mixed use from a developer standpoint, having commercial.
Residential talked about that. We were fine with it being in the back. We were fine with it being on the sides.
Yeah.
But on the front of the street or facing the main street part, that's where we wanted to keep it commercial.
there was also, I mean, if you want to pick over the one that happened before, it wasn't, from the guy's history, it wasn't about just, it was taking the district in a direction that no one was prepared to agree to, because we knew we had this coming. We knew we had a downtown master plan coming, and we weren't willing to bite the bullet for that. Plus, what he said and what he had done historically in different places wasn't the same thing. And that's another reason that that particular one got turned down. It felt schmarmy. It did, that one. That's why. Not because we don't want to have that discussion, but it's that particular one.
Changing the zoning code to allow, like Chris was describing as it was proposed, would not stop somebody from doing something, whether they're renting or gonna do an owner, or if they're gonna do high quality or low quality. Design standards would do that, but just the zoning code itself wouldn't necessarily do that, so.
So Matt and Jamie, I see a few folks are starting to get up and head out before we lose everyone. Might I recommend, I mean, I'm going to send out the presentation shortly to Matt and Jamie to share with you all, but might I recommend maybe Jamie, if you want to host maybe a virtual discussion with everyone and maybe go through the concept board together. Because there's a lot of really great conversation happening with you all kind of in the same space. So that might be a way to kind of continue this conversation and capture comments on each of these focus areas.
Jamie's not here, but that's a good idea and we'll pass it along. And maybe one of the regular scheduled meetings, if there's time to continue this conversation with this board and we can capture the notes and that kind of thing. Yes, good idea.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate everyone's time and comments today, and thank you for participating. I know it's a little challenging looking up at the screen, but is there any last parting comments before the consultant team heads out?
Thank you guys for your time. So
This looks really good though. I mean, there's a lot of, like you captured what I've heard along the way the whole time, just in general with the city, not just downtown. I think a lot of this would be getting in the weeds from here on out and we have plenty of time to speak about it.
Yeah, I mean, we can, if you want to put those weeds on the concept board, yeah, we will see them. I get pinged every time a new note goes on there. So we really do review these and take them into account. Okay, well, I really appreciate your time today and thank you for those who stayed a little extra to provide that really good content.
Thanks, Lorna. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ken. Thanks, Grant.
Bye, y'all.
Thank y'all.